Hi everybody, it's Fay Johnstone here from fayjohnston.com, author of Plants That Speak, Souls That Sing, and Shamanic Herbalist and Reiki teacher. Thank you for joining me here. So I've recently returned from Easter Island, where I was asked to accompany a group. Quite an unusual place to visit, and really iconic actually. And that's why I thought I wanted to share with you my thoughts and feelings about the energy of the place, a little bit of the history, just in case it's on your bucket list as a place to go. And this might help you decide whether or not to bump it further up your bucket list and what to expect when you arrive. Because I know that many of you really have a calling to go to Easter Island and visit those iconic moai. And yeah, all I can say for now is that you won't be disappointed. So I've got a short presentation really just to share some of the photos which I took, because obviously I've got a million photos. Some are brilliant, some are not very good, and there are some amazing photos out there on the internet as well. So just a quick Google and you can pull up all these iconic images of the moai, of the statues, and the amazing petroglyphs. So that's what I'm going to do really. And then if you've got any questions, feel free to connect with me, and I'll see if I can help you. So I'm just going to share the screen with you. Here we go. So this is hopefully now you can see some of my some of the screen, and I'm in the corner, and I don't quite know how to get rid of myself. I'll just put myself down there. Okay, so here we go. Easter Island. Wow. It's firstly, where is it? It's actually I think the most remote permanently populated island that exists on the earth. And to get there, you actually have to go to Santiago in Chile, and then you have to take a plane for 4 to 5 hours. I think it took us 5 hours on the way there and 4 hours or so on the way back. And that certainly shattered my illusions. I was thinking, oh, okay, great, we're going to just get on this little tiny plane and arrive. But I think the plane we were on was pretty much the same size as the plane I was on for my Heathrow to Santiago flight, which was 14 hours. So it's a volcanic island, which is about 66 square miles in total. So this is what it looks like, and you can see here where it's located. And you fly in to the airport is down. Looking at that map, it's down on the bottom left-hand corner. Is where you see this tiny little airport strip. And mostly when you stay in the kind of capital, or the most populated place, which is Roa. And when you actually arrive to Easter Island, everybody's given a lei of flowers, which is a beautiful welcome to the island. It's known as Rapa Nui, which means big Rapa. Basically, because these Tahitian sailors in the 19th century thought that it looks like a big version of a Polynesian island of Rapa, so they called it the Big Rapa, Rapa Nui, and Rapa Nui is how it's referred to by the locals, and or by Chileans as Isla de Pascua, but Rapa Nui. And so it's in what we call Micronesia, Polynesia. It's just really way out there in the South Pacific, and I had certainly never visited any of these Polynesian islands, any islands in Micronesia. So that was my first experience of coming. But I think if you visited other islands, you might find some similarities in the culture. We obviously now we're able to work out where people came from, and they, when we think it was first colonized. There was an archaeologist in the earlier part of the 20th century who was really trying to convince everybody that it was colonized by people from South America, but it actually really doesn't look that way. And it looks like the first people who came were from Eastern Polynesia. and that's why there are some similarities in the cultures and the way perhaps the language is developed and so forth. But we call it Easter Island, and that's because the Dutch explorer who first spotted the island in 1722 spotted it on Easter Sunday. So here we are, and it's just this, volcanic piece of volcanic rock in the middle of the in the middle, not the Indian Ocean by any means, in the middle of the South Pacific. So that in itself for me was pretty amazing, just being in a place that was, miles and miles from anywhere really, and just then thinking about the first people who came and colonized it and populated it. And we know that when it was first populated, it was actually full of trees, a special palm tree, not this one that you can see here, because what actually happened over in these culture, in the way it developed, is they actually basically chopped down the last tree, and this species of pine tree, which was on the island, palm tree rather, I said pine, palm tree, which was on the island, became extinct. So so actually what happened is when the island was first populated, it was a very lush kind of rainforesty tropical type of island with lots of trees. But then over the course of the development of the culture of the Moai, which I'll show you the pictures of these statues, these trees were chopped down and more land was reclaimed for their agriculture, growing crops and so on, to the point where the palm trees, the trees did not regenerate, and so the island became very, very barren, and this obviously did affect the population. So we first, if you like, the Westerners, so it was spotted in 1722, and we've since done lots of sort of archaeology on the island. So this is just a shot here of the port, the harbour, I should say, in Hangaroa. So like I said, if you are staying in the island, you're most likely to stay in Hangaroa, which is a really small settlement, just a couple of streets really. It's most likely that you would stay here, because otherwise you're going to be staying kind of further out, somewhere more remote on the island, where you would be, it's just, you'll be really have to rely on kind of hotel shuttles and taxis, which would, I think, just get really expensive for you, because everything has a price tag on it on the island, plus a tip. So money really talks here. And their currency is the Chilean peso. So what I particularly liked about going down and visiting this harbour here was where the boats come in, there are these amazing turtles, and I'd never seen turtles actually of this size that were they were like so big and ancient, like these big floating dinosaurs basically, and that was just really, really beautiful. And there are lots, you can see one just there on the corner of the picture, on the corner of the right hand side, a dive shop. So there's other activities, as most people go to Easter Island to visit the statues and these historic sites, but there are other activities like boat trips and swimming and lounging in the sun and scuba diving and snorkeling and things like that. So I did actually manage to go for a very short scuba dive, having not done it for 10 years. I had to do a sort of refresh, which was amazing from the point of view that the sea here is incredibly clear, so the visibility was amazing. In terms of things that I saw, I mean, you can see quite a lot of fish actually when you're standing there in the harbour looking over, trumpet fish, all the usuals, I should say, actually, and puffer fish and all sorts of things like that. So I did see lots of different species of fish, but not necessarily the big shoals. And there's certainly no bright, amazing coral on this island. I think it just gets hit too much by tsunamis and waves. The waves are just constantly smacking. You can see the white rollers coming in on the back of the photo there. Anyway, so but you can there's places to swim around here and stuff, but like there's actually much nicer beaches elsewhere, which I probably got to show you here. And I'm just pointing this out here because this is a church in Hangarawa, which is interesting, and many tourists go and to there's a service on a Sunday morning, and many tourists will go to that service just to see the priest who's dressed up with a headdress and lots of feathers. And in the church itself, there's a lovely wooden carving of the Mother Mary with her baby, but kind of in an Eastern Island style, which is also very interesting. This really shows this kind of cross culture, and there's a lot of carving here that the designs that you can see. And mainly, if you look at the one on the left hand side, on the left hand pillar, that's you see that a lot. It kind of alludes to the Birdman culture, which came on the latter period of the island, which I'll show you a little bit about. So automatically, the island's really special. It's very remote and it's volcanic. And I don't know if you've ever visited a volcanic island, but for me, the energy of volcanic islands is incredibly special. It's always very exciting. What I found for me with the island, though, is it actually made me very, very tense. I felt constantly like there was something about to happen, not necessarily like an explosion. There is I'll show you the volcano crater on the island, but it was just, there was a certain tension for me at the whole time that I was on the island, almost to the point where when I knew we were leaving, I was kind of feeling quite relieved. I just kind of got to that point where I was like, oh, I think I just want to get on that plane, because I felt a huge tension with the energy of the island. And just something to point out here, if you really want to go to Easter Island, you do really need to get yourself sorted and book it. There's not a lot of accommodation there, and I don't know about the different ranges of accommodation. I know, there are some hostels, but mostly it's kind of mid-range accommodation. Prices are not cheap by any means because of its remoteness. And they're very, very strict on filling out information about where you are staying, how long you are staying, and so forth. And this is before you get on the plane in Santiago. So everything needs to be sorted. You certainly can't just rock up to Hangarawa and you're not even allowed to do that. So they're really cracking down on people going and just hanging out there and staying there for a long time. This is, I guess, a fight back from the locals who are trying to make a living and want to make sure that they're kind of owning their property and so forth. Anyway, what we're looking at in front of us here is, if you go to Easter Island, you would most definitely go here, and it's the place really where you see these iconic heads. And what we know now is that these are not just heads, these are full statues. And this is the quarry of Ranu Raraku. And in this quarry, I think, so on the island, you've got about 900 of these statues. And I think in this quarry is about 400. So, and the period, so this is the interesting thing about this. The period of this was actually kind of quite recent. They sort of call it the golden age of Easter Island, and it's the bit we all associate with Easter Island. And that's really about from anything from sort of 500 to 1000 AD. So this is what we're looking at when we look at these, and they're amazing carved, like I said, they're full statues. They're not just the heads. And this, I've just put this picture on the left here of one that's also got a petroglyph. He's got a boat carved onto his front there, this particular statue, which is very, very unusual. So probably in most of my photos, you'll see people, because it was for a small island. There was a lot of people, and obviously everybody's visiting the same sites. So the visit to the quarry here is a must, because this is the quarry on the island where all the statues were constructed. And then something which continues to puzzle everybody is how on earth were they moved from these places to be erected on other areas of the island. So we've seen that the island isn't that small, but if you haven't got, you know, a nice big truck to drive your statue on, or to place it on with an articulated crane, then it's actually going to be pretty tricky for you. And so in a way, we're still trying to work out how these statues managed to be transported to these to the different areas of the island where you see them erected, and also how on earth they were erected. So but all of these statues, so they're all from that kind of period, 500 to 1000 AD, and they're all incredibly, even though, I mean, this is the thing, they're all completely different, but they all have a very similar stylistic form of that prominent nose, and a very kind of flat back, and they have some of them like perforated ears, for example, and they have hands sort of that they're holding in front of them with long fingertips and a loincloth covering them. And it's really thought that these were their ancestors, okay? And it's just actually amazing to go and see them. I mean, you can see here, they're all exposed, and what the archaeologists have been doing is digging down to actually, and that's when we've discovered, oh, what, they're not heads, they're actually the full statue that we can see. And so what we're deducing from this is these were under construction in this quarry, and now just let me just show you this large one here. This is called the giant El Gigante, and he is lying down here. He's still he's still left where he was in the quarry, and he's about 20 meters long. And I think we still don't really understand how on earth they would have managed to erect him and transport him to a place on the island where it was obviously going to be his final resting place, because these were the ancestors of this culture that lived there. They were the embodiment of the ancestors, and they were looking over their people to watch for them from their guardian spirits. And just to show you this is one of the most famous platforms that you would visit on Easter Island. This is the platform of Tongariki, and you can see here, even though we're quite far away, these moai are all facing inwards. Very, very few moai actually face outwards to sea, because what they are doing is they're placed to, as their ancestors, they're placed to watch over their community. They might be watching over agricultural fields or a settlement. So they don't gaze out to sea, they gaze over their community. So, and they're all they're constructed up on platforms. So this is actually a great picture, because you can see there's a picture of the lady, the human in the picture. So you can actually see the scale, and you can see that we're not allowed to get close to these statues anymore. And if you're I'm a very tactile person, and I love to sense into things, especially, when I'm working with plants, I love to hug a tree to really connect in that way. So if you're that kind of person, you'll find it very frustrating, like when we're visiting Stonehenge, for example, in the UK now, we can't get close and connect with the stones, and that's a great shame for us, but I understand why. So we're kept here at a very safe distance from this platform, but you can walk all the way around it, because they were carved as well. They would have been carved on the back. And here is a close-up of the pukao, which they also wore. And this is carved out of a different rock that's also found on the island. So there's a quarry on the island for these pukao, and they're kind of like a turban thing, and you can see one of the moai here has been reconstructed wearing his. But actually the size of these, I mean, this picture here, I haven't got a person standing in front, unfortunately, but that's about they're about 5 foot high. So these are enormous, and the statues are enormous, and the sense of being with them is very moving. It's very powerful because you feel so incredibly small, and you really do sink into that place of, wow, what on earth were what on earth was this culture thinking, to construct these amazing statues of their ancestors with such rudimentary tools as well. I mean, that in its sense, it's always a big deal for us in our culture today to commission a statue, but to commission one of this size using all our amazing tools and technology that we have these days is incredible. And so it really makes you stop and think when you are here. And you can see all these stones which have been placed in front of the platform. There's a specific way that these platforms were constructed and padded down so that they could carry the weight of these incredible statues. And this is another image actually of most of the areas that you would go to on Easter Island, you would go to with a guide. You buy a pass which enables you to go into the sites, and you have to get it stamped every time, and they're very, very strict on that. So you always have to remember this like tiny piece of paper when you go with you, and you go with a guide who will explain the history and what to look out for at each site. This site that I'm showing you here is one that you can walk to from Hangaroa, which is actually quite nice, because otherwise you're getting into a minibus and you're driving about 20 minutes to up to half an hour really to get to the different sites around the island. This is one that you can walk to in about 15 minutes from where you might be staying in Hangaroa. But again, you can see these guys are facing inwards. They're built on a very long platform, with stones placed upwards. Everything is very it's very exact, it's very calculated. And I just want to show you this special guy here, and that's me in front, but this special guy here has got his eyes in, and so we are not used to thinking of them with eyes. So this guy has been kind of reconstructed, if you like, to be how he would have looked. So they did have eyes, and these eyes were very special. You can see they've only managed to find one, which is in the museum. The museum again is walkable from Hangaroa. It's free actually, so it's worth going to the museum just to see some of the specific pieces and get an idea of the context of what caused these statues and what we know so far because of carbon dating and so on. So this guy, you can see we're not allowed to get very close at all to the platform or any part of its construction, but he's got his eyes in, and the eyes were placed in at special times of the year for ceremony, we think. And these eyes, as you can see from looking at the photo, they do not face you. They look up, they gaze upwards to the heavens. And this was thought to give or to activate rather the spiritual power, the mana of these statues. And it's actually really amazing to see them with their eyes in like that. But just to note on all of these, everything that you're seeing in these photos, and this is the royal platform here. So I'm at the back of the royal platform, and they're looking out to, well, I'm standing actually between the platform and the sea, and they're looking towards the land. But what we're seeing here are all the moai that have been resurrected and basically put together, because these were smashed. This culture came to an end and they were fallen. I mean, and I have to say they're enormous. I don't know how any man could even think about pushing one over. there was kind of like this uprising with the culture that created these. Because if you think about the manpower, the resources that would have gone into creating these enormous statues, and they were, and you know, we've seen the hundreds that were still in the quarry. So there would have been all sorts of resources, and it's thought that over a certain period of time, there was just, you know, like happens in societies, probably a bit of, you know, unrest and a bit of grumbling from the guys who would have been making these statues. And so what we have actually is these statues were they were toppled over, and you can see here, this is a painting sort of imagining how it might have been, with the native culture just going, you know what, no more, we're not going to worship the Moai anymore, we're not going to worship these ancestors. This is backbreaking work. We need to stop doing this. So there's really interesting sort of feel of this kind of unrest there, and also the fact that they chopped down the last tree. They made the species of tree on the island extinct because they were using so much wood and all the resources of the island in the construction, or in that kind of really in the day-to-day life of how that culture was living. And I can't help feeling, for me, there's like an echo here in the way this was like the way we're living our lives today on the earth as a whole. And it's so interesting to see it on a very micro scale with a culture like this. But just as a note to go back here, this is a Moai that is in the British Museum in London. And he's really special, Hoa Hakanananaia. And he is very beautiful. He has these carvings on his back, and because he was actually given to Britain, the Queen, I believe, in 1868, because they discovered him in this village called Orongo, which I'll talk about in a minute. And they discovered him, and because at the time the culture on the island were not worshipping the Moai, he was up to his neck in sediment, and no one had even noticed him. And you think, really, he's enormous? You didn't notice this massive statue? So they dug him out and they transported him all the way back to the UK, where he sits in the museum today. But you know, now the Chileans, the people of Rapa Nui, they want their Moai back, and this is, you know, opening a whole can of worms for museums all over the world. And there's obviously arguments for having him here. He's incredibly well preserved. He's not outside. And he's this ambassador, isn't he? He's an ambassador for Easter Island. And he is really one of the most magnificently carved Moai that you will see, because the Moai that you will see on Easter Island, they've been reconstructed. They were all toppled and smashed to pieces, and you know, to make it worse, tsunamis have sort of threw the pieces all over the place. So the ones that you can see that have been put together and are standing and erected there on their big platforms, they're all reconstructed, they're all pieced together, and they're all eroding in the amazing kind of rains and winds that it always seems to rain every single day on Easter Island. So there's a top tip. Definitely take an umbrella with you. It's not cold, but you'll get wet at some stage during your trip. So here's our stolen friend. So if you want to connect with the energy of Easter Island, what I would say mostly, first and foremost, is get yourself to the British Museum in London if you're in the UK, and check out the stolen friend, Hoa Hakanananaia, and check out his back. I think he would have been painted on the back as well. So he's pretty magnificent. So moving on to this other culture then. So if this culture of the Moai, so we associate Easter Island with these Moai, with these ancestors, with these amazing statues, with the mana that they carry and this ancestral protection. But the culture, as I said, there was a revolution. There was like, no, we're toppling the Moai. And it's all based around this amazing crater on the island. And it's here from, and this, I mean, this is a beautiful place to come, very picturesque, as you can see. And actually there was, so what followed the Moai culture was this culture called the Birdman culture. So the picture on the left is at the edge of the crater, and this is a place, the place of Orongo, which was called the Birdman village. And the Birdman culture, wow, was just a very interesting culture where basically the village kind of elected the Birdman, but the Birdman didn't really do anything for himself. Each year he had a candidate who ran for him, who fought for him, and the task that this candidate had to do was to swim out to the island that you can see in the photo, and Rapa Nui is that island, and he had to collect the egg of the sooty tern, which was a bird that the birds they kind of got rid of the birds on the island because, again, they were eating everything and they were consuming and, you know, getting rid of the trees, and there were rats and all sorts of things. So the bird population wasn't really on the island, and so they had to, this candidate had to, every year candidates would battle, they would swim out through shark infested waters to gather the sooty tern egg, and whoever was able to bring it back and climb up the rock and hand it back to their to the chief or the person they were running for, he would be proclaimed the Birdman. So it's not the person who does the hard work, it's the person who's chosen the candidate, basically. And that was the system, basically, which was kind of in place when the Europeans turned up and were like, oh, hi, Easter Island, you know, from about sort of 1860 onwards. So that was this Birdman culture was still going on. And the Birdman would be just sitting up in this village for the whole year, making all the decisions, and being looked after, really, and until the following year when the next Birdman contest would happen and his candidate would have to try and get that tern egg again for him. But the interesting thing about coming to this village are these petroglyphs. So there are many different petroglyphs on the island, but these are really quite magnificent. These are not my pictures, actually, because we're not able to get this close to them anymore. We were able to get close to them previously, but since the filming of the Kevin Reynolds film Rapa Nui, I think there's been a lot of erosion. But these are very, very interesting petroglyphs, and you see again many depictions of this Birdman. So they kind of went from an obsession with Moai, with ancestors, with these big statues, to these depictions of the Birdman, this Birdman culture, many different birds. And also there are some other petroglyphs that you'll find on the island in this volcanic rock, and this one here is a tuna fish, really clear. There's lots of things like fish hooks, turtles as well. This was the only good picture I managed to get, but they're pretty marvelous to see, the petroglyphs. So another thing that you might find on the island is called Tapito Kura. And Tapito Kura is, it's the site of one of the largest Moai, which sadly is kind of in lots of different pieces. But what brings people here is this magnetic stone, or rather I should say it's a round stone. It's beautiful round stone shaped by the sea, and it's thought to have magnetic properties. And there are many local stories of healing. They call it the center of the world. The stories are that it was brought from another island and placed here. So there's a lot of, if you like, mystery and mythology around this stone. Again, now you can't get close to it, so you can't really get close to it. If you wanted to get close to it to sense the energy or to use a pendulum, you can't do that because they've constructed, as you can see, this wall around this stone. So our guide, who we had, was very disparaging, and he just said, oh no, you know, he just didn't think, he just said, oh, it's just a stone. He wasn't into any of the story about the fact that it could have any amazing properties whatsoever. And it looks like at some time in the fairly recent history, people put 4 stones around it. So that gives you this idea of it. It feels like it's a bit of a compass. It feels like, you know, this is what gives its name the center of the world. The navel of the world is how it's sometimes referred to. But I didn't actually think that this was particularly remarkable, I have to say. So perhaps it is just a lovely round stone. I don't know. I mean, I love stone. I love volcanic stones. But again, I didn't really meet anyone that could tell me a lovely, convincing story about it. And again, it would have just been nicer to just get a little bit closer than we were able. So just, I've mentioned it, but I'm going to mention it here. If you're interested in Easter Island, you want to sort of get a bit of a feel for it. A film in the 90s. I think it was a Kevin Costner and a Kevin Reynolds kind of production. It's called Rapa Nui, and you can see from the cover here, it has the moai, and it really shows you moai culture, the building of the moai, and it kind of condenses the history of Easter Island into, you know, the length of a movie. And obviously there's a love story, but you get to see the moai, you get to see the idea of this birdman culture and the race for the sooty tern egg. It's completely historically inaccurate because they didn't ever have this crossover of moai culture and the culture of the ancestors with this birdman culture. Not at all. That was not that didn't cross over at all. But obviously, you know, artistic license and everything. But you can see sites on the island, and it's kind of an awful film, but quite funny if you're prepared for a kind of awful film, but gives you a feel of Easter Island. But it's a little bit sad in a sense that it was filmed in the 90s, and it really, apparently, you know, stories I've heard is that it really brought Hollywood to the island. And as you've heard, this is a very small island and with a small local culture, and Hollywood coming into that brought all sorts of issues, or should say modern, a real kind of exposure to some of the bad bits of our modern culture, like AIDS and, you know, prostitution and gambling and all sorts of other things which the island might have been a little bit sheltered from at the time. So it shifted things a little bit on the island, and sadly I think the actors used in it weren't from Easter Island, because many of them didn't have a good enough English. They were actually New Zealand or Maori actors. So obviously it perhaps didn't benefit the island in the way that one might have thought that Hollywood could. I've put a book up here, Easter Island, Earth Island, The Enigmas of Rapa Nui. So if you want to understand the archaeology, if you want to really go into the history, because I've just kind of glossed over it already here, this book by Paul Barn and John Flemley is the one that I would recommend for you to really look into it. But what I wanted to give you here really was a snapshot of what to expect, and to really give you this idea of, well, you know, is it somewhere, is it on your bucket list, and tuning into the energy of why that is, and what you might be looking for there. So really tuning into your heart and thinking, is it worth it for me? Do I really want to go there? What am I looking for there? Because we're all drawn to different places on the earth, and I'm really fortunate that the universe seems to take me to some amazing and wonderful places, and obviously this is probably one of the most remote places that I've ever had the privilege of visiting. And so from that sense, it's incredibly beautiful, and it's incredibly a privilege for us to be able to get to these places. If you think about how, how many air miles it is for us to get there. And so if it's calling you, I just really want to encourage you to, to think about how you would get there, and what you might like to do there. We actually spent 5 nights there, which I think was actually really quite long. You could probably spend between 3 and 4 nights there and still get to see the majority of these amazing sites, and tune in. And obviously we know that if we want to tune in with the energy of any of these amazing statues or places, Easter Island itself, we can connect in meditation. We do not physically have to be there. And so for me, the experience was incredible. I feel very privileged. Like I said, I found the experience, though, very stressful. It was a lot of energy that was just kind of clashing. There was a lot of friction for me and the group I was in, and there was lots of kind of clashing and pushing and resistance. And I noticed probably it wasn't until about 12 hours later, after I'd left the island, that I noticed a huge release in me, a kind of relaxing and letting go, and a brilliant new perspective actually for me on certain areas of my life was able to bubble up, because there'd been some pressure that I'd obviously been resisting, and that was kind of off, and it was almost like things were able to bubble to the surface. So I actually found the experience in a weird way quite healing for me. Anyway, that's it. That was all I wanted to talk about. If you have any questions for me, I'll see if I can help. You can find more about me at fayjohnston.com. But like I said, I'm a shamanic herbalist. I'm a Reiki teacher. I love connecting with the energy of different places and sacred sites. And so check out my book, Plants That Speak, Souls That Sing, and look forward to hearing from you. And enjoy your trip to Easter Island if you end up going, and tell us all about it. Thanks very much. Bye.